Using models to wear your clothes or just shooting them on the floor? Watch this video and I'm going to explain exactly what my personal take on this is. What's going on, everybody? My name's Spencer Lyon, and for those that don't know, I started a brand called Gully Garms in 2012. Since then, had a bit of a change, and now I'm here on YouTube trying to do this whole content, giving value back to people. Today's video, I wanted to talk about modeled photography, modeled clothing versus flat lay photography, flat lay clothing. So just for some simple breakdown, flat lay photography is when you shoot the items on the floor, on a hanger, without a person needed, and modeled photography is when a person, a real human being, is actually wearing the clothing. I want to give some prefix into this topic about where my expertise comes in. For the best part of 10 years, I was using models to wear the clothing that I was selling. I built a brand that was relatively known around the vintage and secondhand community, and I used models that I found through modeling agencies. I then set up my own modeling agency and did castings and found people that I thought had the Gully look. So I created a concept in my mind for what look I was actually going for, and I just made sure that I found people that suited the clothes. One of my biggest mantras for the longest time was find cool clothes, find even cooler models, and that ethos is one of the big foundation points that set Gully up from where it was, and I guess set it up from the competitors that weren't using models at the time, or to my logic, models that didn't suit the brand. This topic itself is super extensive. It requires us to really do pros and cons for both, but I want to be as general as possible whilst targeting actual facts and figures about modeled clothing versus actual flat lay. The underlying thing is flat lay photography is the easiest way to do it straight away from a bedroom because you don't need a single soul to wear your clothing. Put it on the floor, hang it up on a wall, take a photo, pretty much ready to go, ready to sell. With modeled photography, it requires a person involved. It requires you to sort out and arrange somebody to help you out, either by a favor or, even worse in some startup situations, having to pay somebody to wear it. I will say, for a reference, if you cannot afford to actually have a model, or your friends won't do it for a cheap price or even do it for free, you can always use yourself. So one thing that I did from the day one was I used myself as the model on a self-timer. So kind of one thing that was, I don't want to say unique about what I did, but something that I did that I made as a focus point is I wanted to always have models wearing the clothes, because for me at the time, I preferred to see models wearing the clothing. I wouldn't buy items of clothing back in the day that was flat laid, and I used to like seeing it on a model because for me it gave a good reference of how it's going to fit and I could compare myself to that model. Since then, there's been a lot of developments with how the modeling industry has changed and how people being used can have a lot of different consequential factors to it. So one of the biggest factors that I learned through the time of doing it was, once we was established with a brand and a business, one con of modeled photography is that when you use people and you have their faces, this creates a big distraction with conversions of customers. You have to think, people are also looking at models and thinking, I don't look like that. That person looks attractive. Oh, that's quite cool. They've got a nice tattoo. They've got a nice earring. You start to quickly go down this route where the aesthetic that's being set up is the exact thing that distracts you from the product. So therefore, it's not a very good converting factor. Flat laid photography has always been something that, despite it not actually showing you how the item's going to fit, it's an underlying base layer way of advertising the products, which is case in point what we're doing. We're uploading products online and we're trying to sell them. Flat lays give you a very easy way of entry point. Like I say, you can do it wherever you are. You could do it on the go. You could do it at home. It's the simplest way to show your product off in a very quick fashion. Obviously, the biggest argumentative point that I have is that flat lay photography looks the same as everybody else, and you have to work very strenuously to make your flat lay photography stand out compared to the competition. This isn't a case of going on Photoshop and changing the background or uplifting the contrast and brightness in your item or manipulating the image in any way. It requires thought. It requires you to go inside or outside or somewhere else of the box, try and understand how you can diversify this image against other people. The only way that you can counteract doing the same photography as everybody else is if you have leverage of an audience. If you've got followers on TikTok or Instagram that already know the brand, you can then instigate flat lays. So for me, I built up 95% of my brand using models, so that when I had to change with flat lays for the circumstances that I was in, that I couldn't afford to facilitate models, I had already got an audience of people who knew who I was, and seeing those flat lays wouldn't deter them from buying. So at the moment, I'm currently against what my ethos of using models actually stands for, but I can't afford to use models in the brand respect of things. So actually with Gully, because of all these other things that I'm currently doing to distribute. For me right now, modeling isn't where I'm actually at. You know, the brand with Gully, I've not been trying to push it for a while. This is my avenue of what I'm trying to do now. If I was to go back to in a brand mindset, my logic logic would be to use models. I'm going to give you a few ideas or some food for thoughts for why it's good to consider model photography, okay? The biggest point that I think gets overlooked with modeled photography is if you consistently use a model for your brand and people start to know that model based on your brand, they know the model based on the size that you've spec'd him out in the description, but also you have a higher chance of returning customers as a result of you using a model that they may have bought off. So in the past, one of my tactics was I had a friend, Connor, who I instigated as a model to begin with. However, what I learned over time is that this guy was being basically the face of the brand for about a year to 2 years, where he was the only face that I really used. And what my logic with that was, yes, it might not show a lot of diversity with just one type of male model. Everybody knew his height, everybody knew his dimensions and how he wore medium, large, and whatever the sizes of items. Everybody knew what he looked like wearing different sizes. And as a result, my returning customer rate managed to stay at a very high level. One process I think is that people had a good association to the model. I did then go into exploring different ideas and using lots of different models, going completely against that point. But what I will say is that as one major factor that could help you is having familiarity with a face that will then be the representation of your brand. So if you are a small Depop store, try using one of your friends. Maybe just do one shoot with like 20 items with a friend. Try them outside as well. Try and find a good day, go and get some good backgrounds and do it outside. This is a little side tip from it, but you look at places like Depop and you look at other websites like eBay, or you look at all these other places, go on the homepage, see what type of images they're actually promoting. Because remember, if they're putting them on the homepage, it's not because it's just a nice item, it's because it looks like a good item. Consider that when you go into it. Modeled photography and flat lay photography both offer two completely different approaches, and I will say that the topic itself is super complex. The modeling side of using models to wear your clothes requires you to either have good connections with friends, models, be able to afford to pay people to wear your clothes, invest in an idea that you don't have any guarantee that it's going to be successful more than just doing flat lays. For me, mine was an aesthetic. An aesthetic goes deeper than just what you see on the surface. It's what you feel when you see a brand based on what you've seen through the aesthetic. That's what I've always been about. Modeled photography to me is always going to just sit very top tier with where it looks compared to flat lay, because it's the same as looking at modeled and looking flat lay. Modeled photography will always sit pretty high for me versus flat lay because I can appreciate the effort that goes into using models to make an item look good. Whereas I believe that flat lays, anybody can make them look good because it requires less effort, genuinely requires less effort. Using a model, you have to work with a person, get a good feel, have good chemistry and make them look good. However, if you connect with that in the right way, you'll be skyrocketing up from it. So flat lay photography allows you to have, like I say, a no entry point. Anybody can do it and you can just start with it. It's a simplified way of doing it. I guess some things to consider when you are doing flat lay photography is look at everybody else that you're trying to look like and see if there's anything that you can do that can be a unique look to what you offer. There's so many different ways that you can really manipulate a flat lay image, but you have to really get creative with the idea and you have to be consistent with that creative idea in order to get true traction with it. You can't just do one shoot that looks really exciting and then fall back on it and never do it again. It has to be something that you know that you can maintain through consistency and it's going to look good. The algorithm's going to start to know that that's your photography. People will start to follow you. If you're onto a good idea, people will just start to copy you. They say imitation is the best form of flattery, so if people are starting to do the same thing as you, that means that you are obviously appearing successful with what you are doing. I'm not really going to give much more of an opinion on this. I think I've made it quite clear that I just love modeled photography, and in an ideal world, everybody would use models and it would be really tasteful and cool. However, there are some elements to consider with it, which is that if you're using models and you're using their face in there, that there is statistics that suggest that there is a distraction to seeing models' faces, and that's why people do unrec photography now, which is unrecognized, where the head is cut off and it's just shoulder to the item. That being said, that's the opinion of the model photography, and flat lay sits over here. So it's all dependent on preference. I know that photography is not the biggest love for a lot of people. However, if you are in a position to try a model, maybe just give it a go so that you know how that process differs from flat lays. Another thing with using models is that you can always add more price to it because you are investing in a premium look to your product, and yes, it does work with it. Just for a reference right now, if I remember to, I'm just going to show you some of the photography I did for a brand on Depop in my studio with some of the models, and you can kind of see, compared to the flat laid images that they have used, hopefully I'm still getting it there, what that difference looks in aesthetic. Appreciate you as always, guys, for sticking about watching this video. I know that this one is quite a complex one, and I'd like to dive into this one again at some other point and break it down. Here are 2 videos, maybe about modeling agencies, maybe about something relating to this one. But guys, I make videos every day and post at 6:30. If you like what you've seen today, feel free to drop a follow or a subscribe, sorry. Like the video, comment, do whatever the algorithm enjoys, and I'll see you on the next one. Big up.